With part 8, we are leaving behind the Paleolithic and move ahead to the Mesolithic and a new era. First, I want to give some details about this new era, and then we go into the details what has changed in that age of transition. In the Paleolithic, we had Europe covered for great parts with an ice shield. Here you see the frontiers of the ice. You see here the British Isles are all under the ice shield, and it stretches across Europe to what is today Ukraine. And huge parts of the Alps are covered with ice, and many other places like the Apennine here, the Pyrenees as well. And people were living in that small stretch, pretty cool place. But with a period called the Younger Dryas, this changes completely. The ice shield removes, melts down, and great part of Europe leave their ice shield. The savannas and the steppes vanish, and within a couple of 100 years, all over Europe is covered by woods and forests. So what these people do at that time is they retreat from the savannas because they have been overgrown, and they all sort of get confined to the rivers. The canoe is invented at that time, and that is a major device for movement upstream, downstream. So we have a totally different way of living. People get cramped at the river Rhines, and what they do is they collect their habitat there, their buildings, and start living in the vicinity of these small open places. The new way of living stimulates a new sense of order that we have seen was missing in the Paleolithic cave paintings. These paintings are just made up of single episodes, and now out of a sudden we see that the entire art and architecture of the Mesolithic is dominated by orderly arrangements. So what is meant by these orderly arrangements, and why is it a new kind of experience? And I like to once again show that from my personal experience. I have discovered this sense of order for the first time when I was about 8 or 9 years of age. Here we see my family, and down here it's me, my mother, my grandmother, my father, standing at a little mountain stream that I loved very much because we went there for swimming and bathing. And I always wanted to know where this stream, which was already pretty tough and noisy, cascading down the mountain, where this stream sort of emerged from underground. It must have been somewhere on top of the hills, top of the mountain. So what we did very often is we would try to look for the beginning of that stream, walking uphill to find an area where this one is starting. It's a sort of a plateau, and it took a while to get there because the weather is pretty, changing in the mountains, and it took us some attempts to get up there. This was our little village where we lived, and here we went up the mountain about 1,000 meters to get here to the plateau. And I was very much eager to see how looked the beginning of this little stream. And I've already heard that they all come from a source, and I wanted to know what the source is like. It was, to me, I thought it must be something like a mouth where the water is coming out. But when we finally came to that place, like here, my mother is drinking here from a pipe, and I was later on looking where that pipe collected its water, only to find out that there is no such beginning of the stream. The water was coming from a wet meadow which was dispersed all over the plateau. And at some point that water just sort of flew together, and the little stream was beginning as a little, sort of trickling rivulet. So what I discovered at that point is that things don't start as a sharp beginning, but that little stream was at the same time part of the huge mountain. So it was not, here is a stream and there's a mountain, and at that time, at that moment, at that point, the water becomes flowing, but the water was part of the mountain and then turned over into the little stream. So the mountain stream, the source, the plateau, the wet meadow, and the mountain peak, they all formed one big whole, one thing sort of transforming into something else. And that is what people discovered when they discover a sense of order. How do things relate to each other? When we go back to episodic memory, in the Paleolithic you have isolated elements, and the question how do they emerge from each other doesn't show up. But when you come to the Mesolithic and later times, you out of a sudden see that things are connected, they are related. Instead of single elements and their aspects in the aspective art of the Paleolithic, you now have many elements and their relations. And these relations are varieties of participation. And if you put that all together, you get a composition. So you see how one thing and another thing form a huge, a big whole. And that is what we mean by order. Parts relating to each other. And this is what makes the new form of Mesolithic art imagination and experience. There are two basic forms of order that we see emerging here in the Mesolithic. It's spatial order, a symbolism of the center and the cardinal directions, and temporal order, which we simply call the calendar, the time that we can see using astronomy and the genealogy of animals and plants emerging one from the other. So the symbolism of the center is a symbol that we find all over these places, and I want to deal with that first. One of the oldest places that shows the symbolism of the center is found in the south of Turkey, close to the Syrian border, called Göbekli Tepe, which is translated into the navel hill. This place consists of a huge number of constructions of buildings that start to emerge about 9,700 years before Christ and were maintained over 3,000 years. And they were, to show a visible center, they were built, that's where the name comes from, on a hill. So there's a hill, we are standing here on that hill that overlooks a plain and stretches out to the horizon. Here is a position where the navel hill is, and here is the eye that touches the horizon. And here we have the hill, and here we have these constructions made from stone, but now we have a real architecture. For the first time in human history, we don't have just huts that are built and taken away again, depending on the weather and the movement of the people. Here we have residential areas. It remains there for thousands of years. And if we look at these constructions themselves, they are all built according to the same idea of the symbol of the center. So if we encircle the building with this white line here, we end up to see that it is oval or round. And in the center of all these buildings are one or two of these pillars that mark the center, and all the other pillars around the periphery, they all converge at the same point. So you have the diameters and a center and a circle forming the symbolism of the center. If we take a closer look to where the two pillars in the center are pointing, we start out from the entrance, which we see down here. And then we discover that the axis that is formed by the entrance and the two pillars is directed almost exactly south-north. So it's not only a symbolism of the center, but it integrates astronomical directions as well. So that's why we call this a cosmological architecture, because it integrates the building not only in the surroundings, the locale, but into the cosmological elements like the stars, north, south as well. And this is a symbolism, a way of building temples that you find up to the present day. Here we have, many thousand years later, the ziggurat of Uruk in a temple district, which also shows in its diagonal axis a north-south direction. Here we see the ziggurat in Ur, which shows the same pattern, and that's what it looks like today. It has been rebuilt over the recent decades. And we have the same kind of astronomical geometry incorporated in all the Egyptian pyramids. Here the Cheops pyramid, if we look at it from above, we would see that it is exactly aligned to the north-south direction. And this brings me to the next part, part 9, which will deal with the methods that are used either to build these architectures or to preserve the memory of what has been done and why it has been done. And that's what we will see in the next part, part 9, which is continuing the topic of a sense of order. See you then.